If you guys can hear me, press one. I just want to know that we're all good. Okay, cool. We are good. Sorry about the delay. We had slight technical difficulties in getting started. You guys know how technology is. So we're going to get right to it. Just for those of you who are new here, this is how you ask questions. You need to put a bracket Q question and then be like, "How do question, yo?" Like that. You see that? We've got someone in here who's copying all these questions into a document for me, so you don't need to worry about whether or not we saw your question. Yes, I know that was a really good question. So if you guys could start submitting questions for them, that would be really, really great. And we will start. So question from Joseph is, what's your approach to developing drum tones like the one in Flag of the Beast song? What samples do you generally gravitate to?
Um, that's a good question because that was a lot of Jeff bringing it. I had all these samples, and Josh, the guitar player, and Frankie and I couldn't find what we wanted. And so Jeff, who usually comes in at nighttime, brought this slew of samples I'd never heard of. So that's probably a good question for you because you developed a lot of it with Josh, the guitar player.
Yeah, Josh had some really picky notes he wanted on like where things were placed and like how things were panned, which is always kind of a problem working with existing drums. Like you load up Superior and you want to pan China a little bit a different way, and like it might be the right sample, but you can't do it. So we wound up making a giant kit in Contact, and the way
It
that
was the
went was literally just
strangest kit.
it was weird, yeah. It was just me and Josh kind of sitting there going through. I made him like blind shoot out a few samples. We had an overall idea of what we wanted the record to sound like. In this case, really low tune drums. That was like the big thing, especially on the toms. So the first one I knew I wanted on the snare, just something super realistic library wise. So I went for the Get Good snare because I know that one's been sampled to hell and back as far as how many hits per velocity layer. So that gave us a really good sounding bass for our snare drum. The toms we ended up going with were the 4D Sounds Middle Farm. Aquilcani from Tesseract released that pack, which is really interesting because it's the same studio as the Get Good pack, like the same physical location. So when we bust all the drum room mics together, you got one unified sound of that studio, which was really, really cool. And those
Yeah.
toms are just tuned ridiculously low. So that was perfect for it. And then on cymbals, um, it actually ended up being like a hodgepodge of 3 or 4 different cymbal packs. The main crashes I know are from, which is super funny, but the Heavy Shoulders, the Joey's Amur cymbal pack, which it
Why
would be
not?
funny if we
Why
loaded those
not?
up and like
Yeah,
did it to
exactly.
pick it on purpose. It'd be one thing, but like Josh blind picked those ones out of a shootout, which was super funny.
They
Um,
sound great.
yeah, it worked awesome.
Yeah. I like the thing that I
That
liked
is
about the
pretty funny
drums.
though.
I came in. I think I came in one of the next days, and they had at least like a bass setup. And the thing that I liked the most is that the snare was tuned much higher than you would expect from a Muir record, and that was because Josh. I remember Josh and Frankie specifically being like, "We want the snare to like cut through more than say like a beanbag type snare that they have used." Or I guess a lot of metal bands use right now. So that was one of the signature parts of the drum kit for me was how high pitched the snare drum was.
Beanbag. I've never heard it called that way, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes I call those snares like a sneeze. You know,
Yeah.
just literally
Yeah.
sound like someone sneezing. But beanbag's good too. All right, so
Oh,
here's
the
another
kick was. I
question.
saw someone ask about the
Uh,
kick. The kick was fed straight off MIDI. It wasn't even in the
yeah.
contact instrument, so that was just a trigger sample.
Yeah.
Well, the drums sound great. Like they really do. It's a great example of what you can do with fake drums if you put in the right kind of work, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um,
They did.
so So Edgar Salazar is saying, what was your approach with the nine-string guitar slash bass thing? I guess he
Um,
means how getting them to work together.
yeah, I think we only used a nine string on one or two songs. The rest of it was eight strings, right, Jeff?
Yeah, he kind of had a hodgepodge of 7, 8, 9 strings, and I want to say
I
only
only
two
think, yeah,
tracks were 9 songs.
yeah,
Sorry,
there
nine
was a
strings.
mix. Yeah, it was eight and seven for most of them, and the if you listen, well, I'm sure most of you have heard now the isolated guitar tones. They don't really sound that great by themselves, in my opinion. But it's just the fact that they're like half of a bass, and half of the bass tone is a guitar. So we basically made one distorted sound, and the bass did half of it, half the work, and the guitar did the other half, and it just made one instrument basically. And for their riffs, you're just looking for like one unified, like distorted sound to come through. You're not looking for separation between bass and guitar that much.
Just a wall of death, basically.
Yeah.
So, like, did you run them through different amps? When you say you made them one instrument, do you mean that you just set crossovers in the EQ, or did you actually like bust them to the same amp, or which I've never heard of anyone ever doing, but
No,
I'm
I
just
think
wondering
it's just like in
how far you
mixing, our
went.
goal, yeah, our goal was to make it sound like one big thing. They're individually bussed, individually processed, individually reamped, and everything. It was just
Mhm.
when we were carving things, we were carving it to fit like a glove to each other.
It probably helped that the same right hand played both
Sense, and it
instruments
definitely
too.
does.
Yeah,
That makes a huge difference in my experience. So David Krolak is wondering, where do you high pass the bass, and how do you balance the kick drum with the bass?
that's a good question for Jeff.
Yeah, so that setup thing I have on every mix we do is that the kick is going to a multi-band compressor across the bass bus, sub about 190 hertz or something. So every time that kick is getting hit, it's ducking a little bit of the sub lows on the bass, and that gives you a lot of room to push the envelope on the upper bass frequencies without ruining how your low end hits down below. I want to say the main focus on these were like in the 60 range for kick, and then there's a big dip at 120 in the kick as well. So the bass generally fills in what gets cut out of the kick.
Rodney is wondering, and I think this is more for you, Drew. How did you go about capturing the attitude of this album? I feel like you captured the aggression so well in this band to where it brings me back to, dare I say, new metal.
I think it started with Josh being as talented as he is and writing the correct songs, and then obviously Frankie is what he's probably the best at what he does, in my opinion. Like we did 7 songs on vocals in one day, and we didn't stop because he blew out. We stopped because he
Holy
was
shit.
like, "Yeah, I'll just wait till tomorrow to finish the record." So he did all the vocals on the record in 2 days. So so basically,
That's
the
insane.
attitude of the album, yeah, the attitude of the album comes from those two guys being very specifically focused on being aggressive and being heavy, and everything is one channel that they both agreed on. A lot of times when you make records, you have artists with 4 or 5 members that have different opinions or different wants or different needs or different desires. And with this record, it was just we want it to be the most exciting, aggressive version that we can. So it was every decision was just is it that? Yes, okay, use it. Is it that? Nope, okay, cut it. So it started with them, and I captured it the same way I've captured every other record I've done. So I think it really comes from the artist there. I think anyone could have done it, and you would probably still get the base point of that aggression and that kind of like excitement that they were ready. They were super happy. They were in great moods. We had a blast every day. Like there was no sadness, there was no weirdness. Like you can feel how fun it was to make that record, and it started with them. So
I'll disagree with you. I don't think anyone could do it
okay, maybe
because
not.
I think that it takes a special producer. Well, look, I think it takes a special type of person to be able to get out of the way also, because I know that
Yeah,
you get hired to write a lot for bands and to
yeah,
kind of like take over artistically. So it says a lot that you also know when to get the fuck out of the way.
yeah.
That's one of the most important parts of being a good producer, in my opinion. knowing
Yeah,
what's needed in the session.
with this record, I only
So,
co-wrote one song, so the
sorry,
rest
go
is
ahead.
just straight from them. I only co-wrote Flag of the Beast, and the rest is just 100% them. So they came in very prepared and very ready to, make the record that they had in their head.
Nice. So, Kyle Davis is wondering, what was used to get the guitar tone used on the mix we received? Was it real amps and cabs, or was it the Axe-Fx or even a Kemper reamp of a DI or something?
It's a Kemper. It's a patch that I've had for a while with JCM 800 with a hot mod, one of those Soldano 12AX7 like juice booster preamp tubes thrown in. And that was fed into a Mesa 4x12 with a 57 and an API pre. It's a cabinet profile I've had for a while. I've been in love with my Kemper since like 2020 when I changed the way I look at guitar tones.
All right. Josh Hissom is wondering, Drew, the production on Failure Anthem's record is amazing. That whole album has become some of my favorite reference mixes. What was the most challenging tasks, or what were the most challenging tasks you encountered while working on that record?
Um, that was I think the last record that I worked on in North Carolina before I moved to Los Angeles. And that was with my, at the time, engineer, Kyle Odell, who plays guitar in the band. So I'm trying to think because it was so long ago now. He basically wrote and recorded a bunch of songs musically, and we were just hanging out all the time. And he asked me if I would help with the vocals, and I did. He found a singer, put a band together, and the whole record was written and recorded in about 4 days worth of work. So there wasn't really any challenges because it was just two friends creating a record that no one else could bother us with. So at the time, it was Failure Anthem was Kyle, and so that made it easy. So there weren't any challenges on that record. The singer that was the singer on the record was one of the best singers I've ever heard in my life, and he nailed every take. So maybe the reason why you like it so much is because it was just another one like Emure that was just super fun, super easy, and it got done quick. Like the Emure record was done start to finish, including mix, in 3 weeks.
Crazy. Josh told me that he tracked the guitars in 4 hours.
Yep. On the next to last day, we decided to re-record everything on guitars.
So, all right, here's one from Tyler Goodwin, which is, what is your approach to mixing the synths, ticks, and bass drops? I find a lot of people, including myself, mix their tracks and added them in sort of as an afterthought.
It depends on the artist. Like I just finished We Came as Romans, and the synths are very important to that record. So they get treated a little bit more important than the guitars almost. And I guess you take it part by part. When it's aggressive part, you're gonna focus on the guitars and the bass, and when it's a more ethereal part, you're gonna focus on the synths. It just comes down to being willing to take each song in sections and treat each section like its own thing. Ticks to me are afterthoughts, but they're important. So I usually just find where they fit in everything else that's been carved out. And then bass drops, I don't really like super loud bass drops, which I know is, we had loud bass drops on Emure, but for me, I'm just looking for something that makes you feel like you got pushed a little bit in the stomach. So that one is also like an afterthought, but they're still important. It's like when you're done making a cake, you still want to make it look nice. It's kind of like that.
So, Sandra Saddam was wondering, why did you guys end up going with fully sampled drums?
The drummer wasn't able to make it down, I think is what it was. Yeah, I think he lived in St. Louis at the time or something. So it was just a locational demand.
All right, Dave Vole says, no question, just wanted to say hi to the guys. Well, hello, Dave.
What's up, Dave?
Hello.
Good seeing you on Friday.
So Rufus Ambler is wondering, given the dynamic range of Frankie's voice, did you do much on the way in when tracking?
Yeah, I slammed it. I used a Manly reference, which he blew the capsule on halfway through, and we had to ship out and get a replacement from Manly. Because Manly references can take like 120 dB, and he blew that thing. That day that he did 7 songs, the next day it didn't work. Like he blew it. And I think because he spit so much, it got the capsule wet and just destroyed it overnight. Even with a pop filter.
Oh, that's gross.
So anyways, it goes Manly reference. I'm looking. It goes Manly reference through a 1073, through a distressor, which I had on a 10-to-1 with the distortion 3, just to smooth his scream out a bit. And then I have it going through a retro stay level with about, it usually hit around -20. So it was like, by the time it got in, it was pretty, I think the tracks are pretty like blocked on his screams, if I'm not mistaken. But it sounded great because he sounds insane. Just standing in the room, like that mic right there, he would just literally stand here in his boxers and do it. But it just sounded the exact same way in. Like he has a natural distortion in his throat that when you see him live, he sounds the exact same as the record. I'm not adding like too many effects other than compression, just EQ.
That's actually what Joey told me about this session. He said that everyone is going to be surprised to find out that that's exactly what he sounds like raw.
Yeah.
So Kyle Davis is wondering, what was, you already answered this. Dave Escobar is wondering, never mind, you answered this too. All right. Nick Ayers is wondering, what preamp did you use on the vocals?
A Brent Averill 1073, the full one with the EQ.
Cool. All right, Kim Seidel is wondering, is there something in particular you look out for in a guitar tone EQ-wise, aside from blending it well with the bass? I'm asking because on the album they sounded simply amazing, but I've had the hardest time getting them to sound somewhat good in my mix.
Is there something particular that for on guitar tone EQ-wise? That's the album.
I mean, there's
Yeah, I
definitely like
figured.
EQ and compression on them.
Yeah.
I think what's funny about this one, and you'll see when we do the live mix, there was, I'm 90% sure what happened when we were reamping was that I created a separate bus for the reamp tracks and then fed it into the original guitar bus. Because when I opened up this session to print out stems, I realized we had 2 sets of EQ and compression of our like normal stuff that we would do on guitars. And it's nothing drastic, like high pass, low pass, whatever. I think it's try to high pass around 100, low pass around 13K, and then a dip around 250 to 400-ish. Make it the bass, give the bass a little more room in the low mids. There's definitely a touch of that typical Sneap Pro like multi-band compression thing going on in the low mids as well, just to really control the crazy palm mutes. With the low strings, especially if you're doing like dissonant tones or flat fifth power chords or something, the low end really, really surges for that. Yeah, that's most of it.
Here's one from Kyle Davis. In the challenges of this song section on the URM page, it was mentioned that you approach this mix from a rap/hip hop approach. Could you elaborate more on what this means? Is this in terms of the vocal mixing approach and the relation to other elements such as kick and snare, or is it the vibe of the mix as a whole?
I think it was that the drums and the vocals were the most important thing level wise. And if you listen to the songs closely, the guitars are technically the quietest thing in the mix. It goes vocals, drums, bass, guitar. So that's basically where it comes from. It comes from Frankie's attitude. Frankie is a hip hop screaming vocalist. You know what I mean? Like he's always rapping, even if it's screaming. He's never just doing like, rigid rock rhythms on anything. He just is a hip hop vocalist that happens to be screaming. So when we made the record, the elements that are important to hip hop records are low end and drums usually. So we just focused on vocals, drums, low end, and the distortion was actually at the bottom of like priorities when mixing. So that's what I meant when we took like a rap and hip hop approach.
Those of you that are studying our speed mixing course, think back to Joel's priority funnel, and Drew just named it without even knowing that it was in the course. But
There we go.
Tyler Goodman is wondering, at what point in your career did you feel you're able to pursue producing and co-writing records and not just mix? Do you work with some bands multiple times to develop rapport? Every album you've been a part of, I really dig the song structures and how cohesive they are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, I'm trying to figure out what's the first part of that question to answer. Do you feel you're able to pursue producing and co-writing records? I think for me it happened because I
Um,
was engineering and producing,
yeah,
and I think some artists were just getting stuck, and we were all kind of sitting in the room like this doesn't really feel great, and artists just naturally started asking me if I thought we could come up with something better, and I would take the ball and run with it, and I just kept doing it with more and more artists. And then um, the biggest thing for me was that I would find uh, clients or artists that I felt like were really talented but didn't quite have what I felt like were great songs. And I would spend time with them, whether it be I would give them free days in the studio or I would just charge them one price and it didn't matter how long it took, we were just going to make it great. And I got a few bands. I was in a band on Tragic Hero Records out of North Carolina. So I used that to shop two or three bands that I was, quote, developing. And then it just kind of became a thing that I was a producer writer just from some of these bands getting signed and starting to tour and telling other people how they made their records. And it just grew over the last probably 8 years now.
yeah, I've known about you for years, and we've been on Sam Records. Before I knew of you as a mixer producer, I knew about you as a writer
Yeah.
years, years and years ago. I think like at least 5 years now, or 6 years.
I came
So
down to
Nick is
Florida,
wondering, do
but
you
you
find
weren't there.
yourself referencing any of your Cane Hill mixes?
No.
No, no, on Motionless in White, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I came back, but you were gone, so we didn't meet. But I actually got to walk into your studio and see it.
That's my old studio, but yeah, that was. I remember hearing that you were coming to try to save the day on that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't remember what happened, but I do remember that you were coming down.
Yeah. I think the day was saved in
They
one way
lived
or
at my
another.
house for 90 days.
Yeah.
Ugh. So, all right, question from Nick. Did you find yourself referencing any of your Cane Hill mixes as far as feel or vibe in the songs? I love all those records, by the way, but as far as synth, ambience, effects, etc., did you find yourself almost capturing the same vibe? Hopefully that makes sense as a question.
I honestly have never referenced any mix I've ever done for like in the past for records I'm doing now. So the answer is for sure 0%. Because right now Jeff and I are working on the new Cane Hill record, and I don't think either of us have listened to the first record in any way, shape, or form to reference to the new one. You might have up for some of the guitar tones or bass tones maybe, but I haven't.
Yeah, I remember Brian Hood had some really good advice like a few years back. He was referencing his old mixes to make sure that he was always outdoing himself. So in
Yeah.
that sense, like there are times where we'll bring up the old stuff just to make sure that we're one in the right direction sonically for like what the band is as an entity, but two to just make sure that we're doing better than we were before. I will also
Yeah.
sometimes do that with like the band's previous release if we didn't do it, just to make sure we're not totally fucking up. Most cases, it's like it ends up sounding so different it doesn't matter, but. It's
Yeah.
just something to keep in mind, but not necessarily like keep a track in the session and constantly A/B.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Does have you ever had bummed out moments where you're like turn on the previous record and you're like, uh
It just means we're not there yet.
oh? Fair enough. So Tyler Goodwin's wondering, I'm not too far from where I used to be in North Carolina. I remember hearing your name go around years ago when some of my shitty high school bands were looking to record. Did you decide to move to California as a strictly business related? Do you feel your exposure as a producer is better there?
I 100% moved to California for work, and the exposure has been worth every single bit of pain and sweat and awfulness that it took to get adjusted living in Los Angeles. So, yeah. But I think Los Angeles is just a city that when you feel when you feel like you're good at something, you should go to Los Angeles and you'll find out if you're willing to basically sacrifice everything else in your life for it, or you realize, okay, this isn't necessarily what I want to do, and you go somewhere else. So,
It's definitely a meat grinder.
yep.
So Kim Seidel is wondering, so this album seems to be all emotions, all about emotions. Like Frankie sounded so furious at times that I just wanted to go out and punch things. Did he have some kind of ritual to get in the mood during recording, or did he just go to the mic and pull it off?
He literally just goes to the mic and takes his shorts off and just does whatever he does in his boxers. And then as soon as he's done, he puts his boxers on and has a bottle of water and asks what we want to eat for dinner. It's fucking crazy. I think he knows how to channel his emotions. I think they're all in there, like whether it be like fury or sadness or like contempt or this or that. I think he just has done it now for so long that he's like, okay, this is what I want, and he literally just like reaches in himself and just throws it out at 100 miles an hour, and then he's like, okay, you guys hungry? Let's go get sushi. I'm just like, yeah, that sounds good.
Man, it's such a relief working with artists like that who
Yeah.
can just channel it at will. So Thomas Weathers was wondering, how long did it take you to mix this song, or was it more or less done as you went and just called it done when you felt like it was?
Our process is kind of mixing as we go, but there's always a okay, tracking is done. Jeff, can you come in and do your thing? So Jeff and I will just trade off basically. He's very good at all the like carving, the EQing, like the microeconomics that are important to a mix of like making things aren't fighting, cloudy, this or that. And then I'll come in the next day and I'll basically try to paint a picture with everything that he's leveled and made sound great. And I'll try to make the decisions of like, what do I want to be the focus here? Is it, do I want it to sound like three vocals? Do I want it to sound really emotional and lonely, like one vocal? Like, what do I want this synth to be doing? Do I want it centered? Do I want it to feel like it's going left to right? I'll do all those things, and then I'll send it to him, and he'll say, okay, now I hear all these things I need to change because of that, and he comes back and he does another pass, and then I'll do another pass, and we'll end up doing probably 4 to 6 passes. So yeah, there is definitely a mix stage, but we could technically bounce it when we're done tracking, and I wouldn't be like sad if someone heard it. It's just, it's the difference between a good mix and a great mix is that 10%, that 15% that you spend the time on. And that's what I call mixing.
Good answer. So Caddy Werner is wondering, why were all the drum samples in stereo? Was it to make the mix sound bigger? I'm used to working with all my drums as mono tracks, mostly for panning purposes, and was really surprised when I opened this session.
I had to open up the multi-tracks just to check real quick. The drums themselves should be mono, just like the individual mics. The cymbals will end up being stereo, and that's largely because of how we picked the samples we did. So there wasn't like a uniform overhead mic across all of the sample packs that we used for the sample or the cymbals. So as a result, I just printed a hi-hat, like each individual cymbal went to its own output and contact and then was bussed together in the Cubase mixer. So like the end channel was all those stereo channels to a single bus for cymbal spots, and that was mixed on. And that's mostly just because we chose samples that happened to be pre-panned in a certain way, or that we needed to like shift panning to the other side. And you can't do that without getting it stereo first.
Tyler Goodwin's wondering, what was the biggest risk you took in your career to push yourself to the next level?
Moved to Los Angeles when I didn't necessarily have the money to sustain it for more than like 3 months.
I bet that was scary.
Yeah, it was the scariest thing I've ever done, but it ended up being the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And the worst case scenario was I fail and move back home to North Carolina. So
I guess it could be worse than that, you know?
yeah.
All right, Nick Ayers is wondering, what's your view on mid-side EQing, specifically for taking instruments that live where the vocal frequencies are and lowering their volume into mono? Or if that's just too much, just your view on mid-side EQing in general.
Go, Jeff.
It's used in spots, I guess. The thing that popped out of me, the thing that popped out at me from that question was around making the vocals fit with the instruments, and there is a very specific thing that we do on all of our mixes where the like routing of the buses is important. Where we have 4 top channels. It's a fake master bus, a 2 bus that feeds that, and then a separate instrumental and vocal bus that feeds the 2 bus. On the instrumental bus, we've got FabFilter's Pro MB sidechain to the vocal channel, and the vocal channel is going to duck between like 1 and 2 dB of just the like 2 to 6 kilohertz range. I'll usually sweep it based on like where most of the cymbals and guitars are hitting, but there's definitely some ducking of the vocal track, of the instrument track based on the vocal track, so that helps it gel really, really well. And then we do some, like the entire mix is summed. There's a mono maker on the end under about 80 hertz, so that ends up being mono. Other than that, unless trying to do something super corrective, I won't touch mid-side EQ.
All right, Tyler Goodwin is wondering, what's your opinion on top-down mixing, and what did your mix bus look like on the Amur record?
I don't know what that is.
It's basically what we just described, like having all your, like if you look at where a snare top mic is in our mix, it's going to feed a real snare channel, which feeds a snare channel, which feeds a drum bus channel, that feeds an instrument channel, that feeds a 2 bus channel, and that feeds your fake master channel. So
It's like
definitely a big fan of it.
It's like a big pyramid scheme. Everything's feeding the thing above it.
Yeah, we're all wearing Avon and shit. It's great.
Yeah.
Basically. So, Kim Seidel's wondering, you already mentioned that a lot of times you stepped aside and let the band work their magic, but has there ever been a situation where you and a band, or you and the band, actually disagreed?
Yeah, of course. And I think you have to have, I think that it's healthy to have that, because I would rather argue with an artist because that means they give a fuck. And there's so many artists that are making music that they don't even care about right now. That if a record is too easy to make in terms of like uh, the people not having any energy towards it or people not being engaged, that's usually a bad sign. So yeah, there's plenty of times, even with like my engineer for the longest time. His name is KJ. He's in a band on Fearless called The White Noise, and he's one of Jeff and I's best friends out here. We work on so much together, and there was plenty of times, even making his record, where he and I would just go at it because we cared. And so there's an underlying moment of we're all fighting to make a great record. It's just trying to figure out which is the right path to take. So yeah, there's plenty of times, and when you get to the end, it's always just like I'm glad we figured that out together. It's just going to be heated sometimes.
Got to be able to take it. So
Yeah.
Christopher Hummel's wondering, what plugins are you using to make the lows mono?
Hybrid too. I threw that into the chat. Basically, the things we're going for there are the mono maker knob and the stereo width knob. Sometimes we'll touch like the EQ section because it's got a cool like it's almost like a cheap version of a Manly Massive passive. So it depends on how much UAD plugins we're using on the mix and if we can initialize the massive passive at the end or not.
Justin DeCho is wondering, what role did you guys play in creating the album instrument tones? Did the band come in with their tones pre-prepared, or were the tones designed from the ground up? And if so, what advice can you give on this process?
We decided them from the ground up, didn't we, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean the guitars were
Yeah.
like from DI. I think a lot of it, like just to be clear, like the writing is going to shape everything. And then I guess we started from the drum tone, so that gives you the real like heavy bombastic low end. So you know you've got to fill something in with the top. Frankie's vocals on top make it like obvious that you want the much like a really grady end and not necessarily like something really throaty in the low mids. Like the whole album has a kind of scoop sound to it, which is part of the whole hip hop vibe. And I think that is what influenced our choices around guitar and bass tones.
Yeah. It went back to the hip hop thing where there's not that much mid range in hip hop. And so for this record, we wanted it to be really loud and we wanted it to feel big. So we knew whether it be earbuds or car speakers, we were going to carve more mids and mid lows out than we would on, say, a Crown the Empire record. So yeah, that was a huge factor in the guitar and bass tones was how loud can we turn this song up without it distorting the speakers or the playback. So
Kenton Smith is wondering, have you ever worked with such low-tuned guitars before? And what was that experience like?
I hadn't. So for me, it was brand new. I think I got spoiled because the first person that I worked with a 9 string and 8 string was Josh, and he's one of the best right hand players I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
So he would just play it, and I was just like, next.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing with the really low tuned guitars is that you get the effect where the dude hits it too hard and ends up making the string go sharp. And Josh does that, but in like the most musical sounding way where you just want him to do it twice because that's how it sounds good. So even like
Yeah.
he somehow makes even weirder shit that is supposed to be wrong still sound good.
So Joseph is wondering, when co-writing Flag of the Beast, what approach were you taking? Can you speak to the overall songwriting process and approach?
Yeah, they brought in a bunch of songs. If you listen to the record, a lot of it is linear. Like there's repeating parts in the songs, but they don't wake up and go, all right, we need an intro, verse, pre, chorus, verse. They're not writing it in the traditional formatted ways. But when we got to that demo, I was like, this one feels like this could be the single. Why don't we take a stab at making this one have more of a traditional format? So that was where it started. Was excuse me. I felt like there were certain parts that were choruses and hooks, but they were in different places. So I just started chopping and building a song off of their riffs that they had brought. And there was like, I think it's the pre-chorus of Flag of the Beast, and he had done it once at the end of the demo, and I was like, no, that is too catchy to not do it. That should be like 3 times in this song. And then Josh and I said we need a bona fide chorus where it just kind of opens up to where Frankie can say something anthemic. So we just wrote a quick riff, and then Frankie came in, and I said, what do you want to say? Because he's very good about being like, I want to say this. I didn't write any lyrics for him. I just came up with rhythm ideas to suggest, and he would make it his. And so we did that. And then before you knew it, I had just trimmed all the fat out of the parts that didn't feel important and put the emphasis on all the catchy parts. And that's how, like, when you listen to the record, you can definitively tell that that one was shaped to be a single on the record. And that was on purpose, is because I felt like that was one of the coolest demos. I just wanted to elevate it all the way.
Makes sense. And final question. And is it worth spending the extra money getting the BAE 1073 with the EQ? How much do you actually use the EQ on yours?
I have it on all the time. Let me see what I have it set to, because I just leave it. I haven't looked at it in like 2 years. It's probably, I don't know what the price difference is, but I'm just cutting some low end out, and I'm just scooping a little low mids out and adding a little bit of high end. So it's probably not worth buying, but I just did in case I got into in case a vocalist came through and I just heard something definitively that I didn't want going into the box. So I also found a good deal on it. Someone was just selling it. So it wasn't like I went to the store and had to make that decision. I just came across a good deal and grabbed this one.
I know we used the Q more when the dude's using an SM7. So that was definitely a change, that because the Manly has such a perfectly clean top end that you almost don't need to goose it. Whereas everyone who's worked with an SM7 knows it's the darkest piece of shit in the world that you have to brighten up.
Yeah.
It's not a piece of shit. It's a fantastic vocal mic. But
yeah. Well, Drew, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to answer all these questions and hang out with us. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks in LA at Sphere for the
No problem.
Yeah, thanks for
See
having
you
us.
soon.
All right, have a good day, dudes.
You too.